The Roland TR909 Rhythm Composer, the basic fundaments of house music, EDM and multiple genres. This is just one of the ways that I mix it. Hi and welcome to the Crates Motel. My name's Conan, and in today's video I'm going to discuss and demonstrate the basics on how I mix the Roland 909 to get that classic 909 house sound. Right, so let's jump in. Here we are in Studio One from PreSonus, my chosen DAW. I've just got a basic 909 drum beat. Just a classic house beat there. Now I just want to make sure that the levels are all okay. Yeah, that's fine, that's a good place to start. So the way that I mix is I use a top-down style of mixing, which basically means I add some processing to the mix bus and the buses before I start processing the individual channels. So starting off with the mix bus, I'm just going to add a compressor and an EQ just to get a general kind of sound to the whole mix. So here we have the SSL G-Bus compressor. I use the UAD version, but there's a ton of companies that do them. Got fairly standard settings here for a mix bus. I'm probably just going to have to pull the makeup gain just back a little bit there to get the levels right. You want to get into the habit of making sure that when you use any kind of compression or any kind of effects, that when you bring them in, it doesn't make the signal louder, because that can fool you into thinking it sounds better. So make sure you level match basically. Now what I want to aim for here is about 1 to 2 dB of gain reduction. I just want a little bit of glue, I want a little bit of movement in the drum beat. Now with the attack set at about 30, I'm letting the transients through, so it's not squashing things down too much. Because you know, with the mix bus compressor, I don't really want anything to be too squashed to start with. And with the attack at 0.1, it gives me a nice punch to the sound. The ratio at 2 for mix bus is fine. I might try 4 sometimes, but I think for this situation, 2 is probably going to be okay. Let's just try it at 4. Yeah, see, at 4 for me, it just sounds a little bit too squashed, and I want it to be a real subtle effect to start with on the mix bus. So let's stick with 2. And then as you can see with the mix knob, I've dialed back some of the dry signal in there as well. At 100%, let's just bring some of the dry back in. In bypass. Just bring the level back a little bit. So what that's done for me there is it's turned quite a flat 909 drum beat, standard house drum beat, and it's just giving it a little bit of movement, a little bit of breathing, a little bit of life. So it's kind of bouncy. So with the EQ, it's a Pultec style EQ. It's the Better Maker from Plug-in Alliance. Now it's very, very broad strokes. I just want to kind of give a little bit of weight in the bottom end, a little bit of shine in the top end, and then I've got a high pass filter at 19 Hz, 20 Hz, 21 Hz, just really getting rid of the real low end information that you don't need. So you can hear it's just giving a bit of weight in the bottom end and just a bit of shine in the top end. It's really, really very subtle. But with the EQ on the mix bus, I want to kind of get the sound for the entire mix very, very early on. So that's why I add the EQ very, very early in the mix. So now I'm actually going to start working on the drum bus. Now, again, what I do here is add a little bit of compression and a little bit of EQ. Now, obviously, in this situation, we're only mixing the drums. So it might seem a little bit crazy just now adding more compression and more EQ just to the drums. But the reason I'll do that is because obviously in a normal mix, I will have synths on a different bus, I'll have pianos on a different bus, bass on a different bus. So I like to have all the drums going into a drum bus so that I can sort of affect them overall with compression and EQ. So as you can see here, I have the drum bus and I have the kick, the low percussion, which is claps and snares and toms, and the high percussion, which would be like hi-hats, cymbals, tambourines, triangles, that kind of thing. So these three buses are then going into the drum bus. So with the drum bus, I'm just going to use a very general compressor. Something like the G bus again is fine. And again, what I want to create here is a little bit more movement. So I'm going to drive the compressor a little bit harder, sort of 4 to 5 decibels of gain reduction. Going to take the sidechain filter back to kind of around about 150 Hertz again. I've got the attack on 30 again because again I want to let the transients through, not squash it too much, and the release on 0.1, keep that punch. And I'm going to bring the mix knob back just a little bit. So as you can hear, what I've done there is I've just kind of given the drum beat a little bit more bounce again, just a bit more groove, a bit more swing. Bypass. And back in. You see, with that compressor in now, it just, for me, it makes my head nod. It just gives it a bit more of a groove, a bit more of a swing. Yeah, I'm happy with the way that sounds. So for the EQ on the drum bus, again, it's going to be kind of a broad stroke EQ. One of the EQs that I love using on the drum bus is the API 560. I use the UAD version again of this. Now I'm going to cheat a little bit here, but I'll explain what I've done. There's a preset that I made myself, which I use for 909s quite a lot. Doesn't always work, but we'll try it. And basically what it's done, as you can see here, I've pushed it up just down the bottom at 63 a little bit. I've kind of cranked up 2K and 4K just a tiny little bit, and just adjusted, just added a little bit of top end at 16K, maybe 8K, just a little bit there as well. Take that back a little bit because I want the levels to match. But what you'll hear when I bring the EQ in is it just opens everything up for me, and it just kind of gives it a nice all-round feel. And then bypass. If you just concentrate on what the hi-hat and the claps do, they just kind of brighten up and just sound crisper. Bypass, and then in it comes. Yeah, I'm happy with how that sounds. So now I've got the general EQ of the drum bus sounding how I want it to. I want to move on to the individual sounds in the drum beat. So I'll always start with the kick. For me, the kick is the foundation in any type of music that I mix, be it house music, hip hop, reggae, anything apart from classical music, obviously. Now, because I took this drum beat straight off the 909 without adjusting the sounds on the 909 at all, as you can see from the actual waveform, the 909's got quite a bit of sustain on it. So quite often what I might do is I'll use a transient designer just to kind of tighten the kick drum up. Because especially with dance music in a club, if you have too much sustain on a kick drum and too much information in the low end with the kick drum, it's going to really bury anything else like the bass line or any other low end information from synths. So what I'm going to use here is the SPL transient designer. And with this, I'm just going to bring the sustain back a little bit on the kick drum. Yeah, for me that sounds a lot tighter. Probably just bring the attack back a little bit as well, just to kind of round off the kick, just take the transient back a little bit. And I can do that with the transient designer without using any more compression. For me personally, I feel like you have a lot more control over the attack and the sustain of the sound. Yeah, that sounds good to me. So now what I would do is just EQ the kick drum just a little bit. It just sounds to me like it just needs a little bit more weight in the bottom end, and I just want to kind of shave off the top end a little bit because it sounds a little bit clicky for me at the moment. And you know, and I know that later on in the mix that click is going to start infringing on other things. So I'm just going to use a standard stock EQ here. On Studio One it's the Pro EQ, but it's pretty much the same on any DAW stock EQ. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get rid of the low end information, the high end information, boost the bottom end just a little bit, around about 55 to 60 Hertz, get rid of a little bit of mud around about 200 Hertz, and that's probably going to sound okay with the 909. So I've taken that back to about 20 Hertz. Going to boost it around about 56, yeah, maybe 60. Tighten the Q up a little bit. Just take that back a tiny bit. And then let's just get about 200. And then just get rid of the top end. Okay, that sounds good to me. It's got a bit more weight, got rid of the top end and just clean the mud up around about sort of 200 Hertz a little bit. And one thing I want to point out here is I don't generally mix in solo on any instruments at all. I like to mix in context, and that's probably the better thing to do. When you mix in solo, you might concentrate on really getting something sounding super great in solo, but then when you bring everything else in, it just sounds terrible. So I like to mix in context. But with the kick drum, because for me it's the foundation of everything, I do quite often mix that completely in solo, and then I'll gradually build things around the kick. So I'm going to move on to next now is the claps. So let's just take out the high perk and just hear the clap and the kick together. Let's just take the clap just back a little bit in the mix. Now, as I said earlier, because I've taken this straight off the 909 without messing around with the sounds in the 909 at all, again, the clap here has got quite a lot of sustain on it. It's that real classic 909 clap sound. Hear the sustain? Now, what I could do here is I could use Transient Designer again, just to shorten it, or I could actually shorten it in the actual waveform just by editing it. But I'm going to leave it in this kind of longer sustain style because it's just that real classic 909 sound that we all love. So what I'll do here at the start with the clap is I just want to clean the clap up a little bit. So I'll take some of the bottom end out, and that's probably all, to be honest with you. So just using a stock EQ again. Just take the bottom end out. Now you don't want to go too high up because it starts sounding a bit brittle, especially on a 909. And I want a bit of body in the clap as well, so I don't want to cut too much off the bottom. So I've got it about 165. That sounds nice to me, so I've just really got rid of the bottom end information that you just don't need. So now that I've cleaned the clap up, what I want to do is just some work on the low percussion bus. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some more general EQ now, and just add some compression. So just by adding a little bit of body on the 160, a little bit of the 2.5 kilohertz, and then maybe 5K on the air band just here. Bypass. You hear how it just brightens everything up and gives it that nice kind of top crispy feel. And bypass. And obviously, because I've brought the top end up a little bit, it does kind of give the impression that it's made it louder in the mix. So I'm going to bring it back just a little bit on the bus. Now what I'm going to do is just add some compression on the low percussion bus. Just to add a bit of punch and just to kind of glue it in a little bit. So I'm going to use the DBX 160. This was a compressor I used to use a lot in the analog days back in the 80s. And what it does for me on snare drums and well, just drums and as a whole really, is it kind of adds this really nice kind of glued punch. So you can hear straight away on the clap then that it just sounds a lot punchier and really it's got that kind of classic 909 sound that we're all used to hearing. So that's probably just a little bit too much. So I'm going to dial back the compression a little bit and the threshold, just take that up a little bit, and I need to just match the gain there as well. So here it just adds that little punch just as I brought the compression up there. Yeah, that sounds great to me. So let's just hear it all together again. I'm just going to drop the compression out of the clap just for a second so you can just hear what kind of effect the compression has on the clap. And bypass. And back in. If you listen really carefully to the sustain of the clap, the compressor is kind of bringing it up, and it just kind of, for me, what I love about this compressor in particular on snare drums and claps in this situation is it just kind of, it brings up the dirt, it brings the dirt up from the clap, and it just really creates that real classic kind of early house, early techno kind of sound to the 909. So now what I would do is I'd start working on the hi-hat. Now listening to that in the context of the mix, I can hear that I need to clean the bottom end up a little bit and then just maybe bring it up in the high mids and the high end. So I'm going to use just a stock EQ just to clean it up just a little bit in the low end. So let's just use the Pro EQ again from Studio One. Now I want to say with most other hi-hats I would probably bring the high pass filter up a lot further, but with 909s they have a really nice kind of sound to them in the low end, like a kind of like a body to them. So I don't like to push it too high on the 909 because it starts sounding a bit brittle. I'll show you what happens if I push it too high. You can hear it just sounds a bit brittle and it loses kind of body and energy. Still brittle there. So around about 180 in general for me works with the 909. It kind of leaves a bit of body and energy in there, and that doesn't really interfere with anything else either. So I'm just going to leave that like that. Yeah, that sounds great to me. And now what I want to do is I just want to kind of bring the high mids and the high end up a little bit. Again, for the hi-hats, I like to use the mag. Same sort of reason as I do for snares and claps. It's a nice kind of EQ in terms of it hasn't got a lot to play around with. It just seems to hit the right frequencies in the right place. This is definitely an EQ worth picking up. Now I'm going to push about 10k on the high end on this. Let's just bring about 2.5 back a little bit. So in bypass, it just sounds a bit flatter, and then when I take it out of bypass, it just brightens itself up a little bit. I'm going to bring it, just take it back a little bit in the mix again, because I've brought it up in the high mids and the high end, it kind of gives the impression that it's actually louder. So that's in bypass. Take that back just a little bit. Yeah, so that sounds good to me. So now I've got the hi-hat sounding exactly how I want it to sound. I might want to make a few creative decisions. Do I want the hat to sound, more lo-fi or crunchy? Do I want to add some reverbs to it or anything? Do I want to add some tape saturation? So they're really like creative decisions, but I'm going to stick to some basics here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of tape saturation just to make it sound a little bit more lo-fi, and then I'm going to show you a little trick which I found completely by mistake. So with the tape saturation, you can use any kind of tape saturation really, but I'm going to use the Shure from UAD. I like using this tape saturation because it's quite subtle, but it just adds a little bit of a lo-fi feel to it. Now my settings on tape saturations I tend to go for the 456. That's very, very common on tape saturation. It's the kind of tape that I used to use all the time in the studios in the 80s and the 90s. So generally when people model the 456, it sounds pretty close to how the 456 sounded. It's not always spot on, but we know the argument with analog and plugins. It's never going to be exactly the same, but it's close enough for me and it's close enough for people listening. So I'm just driving the input a little bit just to add a tiny little bit of saturation. It's very, very, very subtle. You're probably not going to pick it up unless you're listening in headphones. So that sounds good to me. But actually, another thing I want to show you, let's take the tape off for a second. Now this is a trick which I found completely by mistake. I added the wrong compressor in the wrong place and it did something to a hi-hat and I was suddenly like, oh, okay, that sounds really, really good. Make a note of that. I have actually since then seen a couple of other producers and engineers do it. So, I don't think I've broken ground or found any kind of secret weapon. Obviously other people have found it and used it for that purpose. But Waves do a plugin called Renaissance Axe, which I think is supposed to be for guitars. It's kind of a compressor. I don't really know what it actually does, but it sounds really, really good on hi-hats. It's cheap. It's kind of one of those special plugins like Oxford Inflator, Soothe is another one. It's one of those plugins where people don't really understand maybe exactly what it's doing, but it just sounds good. And if it sounds good, it is good, right? So if I bring back the threshold a little bit, you'll suddenly hear the hat just kind of starts dancing and has a bit of energy to it. Bypass. See, for me, the hat sounds, sonically the hat sounds good, but it hasn't got much energy and it hasn't got much swing and groove. As soon as I bring the axe in, it just grooves with the clap and the kick more, and for me, it gets where I want to be, which is a flat 909 drum beat sounding like it's got swing and it's breathing and it's a bit pumpy and it sounds nice and glued. I want to bring the gain back a little bit because it is fooling you slightly with a bit of a gain jump. So what I want to do now is give you a before and after. I've got the levels matched pretty close, I think. There might just be a tiny little bit of a jump in the levels. And what I want you to really concentrate on is not just the fact that it sounds crisper and it sounds nicer balanced for me, but also that by using transient design and by using compression and by using EQ and just affecting the way the transients are on the drums and the sustain is on the drums, you can make a very flat 909 drum beat, which still sounds great to me because I love the 909, but you can make a very flat drum beat that's completely gridded, no swing on it whatsoever. This suddenly has this swing introduced into it and this movement, and it just breathes. And for me, it just has that real classic 909 drum sound. So first, here it is in bypass, just a flat, raw bones 909 drum sound. And now with all the effects in. So I'm going to basically A and B it so you can hear it before and after. So before and after. So can you hear what I mean by just with those subtle changes with the transient designing and the compression? It goes from flat 909 drum beat to head nodding 909 drum beat. That for me is the essence of house music. That for me it was what I was trying to create and what I always try and create when I mix down drum beats. And that's it, the classic 909 sound. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe for more mixing and mastering tutorials and plugin reviews. My name's Conan, this is the Crates Motel. Until next time.